Solomon succeeded King Saul and King David as the third and final king of the unified nation of Israel. He was the son of David and Bathsheba, the former wife of Uriah the Hittite, whom David had slain to cover up his infidelity with Bathsheba while her husband was fighting in the war. Solomon penned the Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, and a large portion of Proverbs. Solomon reigned for 40 years. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. Solomon undoubtedly felt the burden of ruling over God's people. The king made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, early in his reign by marrying his daughter. This action demonstrated Solomon's willingness to use marriage as a political tool, and he would eventually take polygamy and foreign marriages to dizzying heights. God tolerated polygamy among his people in the Old Testament, but it always cost them because it was against his will. The king's behavior would exact a terrible price, not only on Solomon, but on the entire nation of Israel. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David. At the time, the Israelites were sacrificing on the high places, a pagan practice learned from their Canaanite neighbors that was against Mosaic law. Leviticus 17, verses 3 and 4. Any Israelite who sacrifices an ox, a lamb, or a goat in the camp or outside of it, instead of bringing it to the entrance to the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord in front of the tabernacle of the Lord, that person shall be considered guilty of bloodshed. They have shed blood and must be cut off from their people. Despite this, Solomon loved the Lord by following his father David's statutes. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon answered, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" Solomon famously asked the Lord for wisdom at Gibeon, the most famous high place. God began the proceedings by appearing to Solomon and making an incredible offer. "What should I give you?" Solomon's response demonstrated that, in some ways, he was wise beyond his years. When he became king, he was about 20 years old. The young man was aware of his shortcomings. He had no prior leadership experience, but he had been appointed ruler of a large number of people. What he required was a receptive heart in order to judge and lead them correctly. Realizing your desperate need for God is the first step toward becoming a kingdom man. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have asked not for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands, as your father David did, I will give you a long life." Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the Ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court. God was so pleased that Solomon requested wisdom rather than long life or riches that he granted the request, and added to it what Solomon did not ask for: riches, honor, and a long life. James 1, verse 5. "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." However, in order for these promised blessings to become a reality, Solomon would have to walk in the ways of the Lord and obey his statutes and commands. God's promises were certain, but they could only be obtained through obedience. Solomon's reaction to the encounter was worship and feasting. 1 Kings 3 verses 16 to 22. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, 'No, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours.' But the first one insisted, 'No, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine.' And so they argued before the king." The author of 1 Kings clearly intended the story in this section to demonstrate the profound wisdom that God had bestowed upon Solomon. It helps us see that wisdom is more than just acquiring knowledge and understanding. Wisdom, on the other hand, is spiritual understanding applied to earthly living. God had given Solomon not only intelligence, but also the ability to see the world through a spiritual lens and apply that lens to everyday life. The book of Proverbs, mostly written by Solomon, demonstrates that God had blessed the king with the ability to put spiritual truth into action. The king acted as Israel's one-man Supreme Court, serving as the final level of appeal in difficult cases. This particular case involved a quandary between 2 prostitutes. Each of them had given birth to a child. The first woman claimed that the second woman's child died as a result of her sleeping on him. The second woman then placed her dead son next to the first woman and took her living son for herself while it was still dark. When the first woman awoke to find her child dead next to her, she realized it wasn't her son. The second woman vehemently denied it, claiming the exact opposite. The king said, "This one says, 'My son is alive and your son is dead,' while that one says, 'No, your son is dead and mine is alive.' Then the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, 'Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other.' The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, 'Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him.' But the other said, 'Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Without the assistance of a DNA test, the average judge would be perplexed by the case. Solomon, on the other hand, knew exactly what to do because of his God-given insight into the ways of human nature. He said to divide the living boy in half and distribute half to each woman. And, just as the king predicted, the baby's true mother begged for his life and was even willing to give him up. The other woman cruelly seconded the king's decision. Then the king gave his ruling. "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Solomon gave the living baby to the first woman after his unique solution to the dilemma was rewarded. The story quickly spread throughout Israel, and everyone was in awe of the king because they saw God's wisdom in him to carry out justice. Solomon's reputation as the wisest man who ever lived spread quickly, bringing God glory.